The rise of the Ottoman Empire was one of the most powerful transformations in human history. From a small frontier tribe in Anatolia, they grew into a force that would shake Europe to its core. For centuries, the Ottomans stood at the gates of kings, sieged cities, shattered armies, and transformed cultures. They were both feared and respected, conquerors and administrators, warriors and builders. This is the epic story of the Ottoman Empire, the empire that brought the Crescent deep into Europe. Origins of the Ottoman state. At the dawn of the 14th century, Anatolia was a patchwork of fading Byzantine fortresses and small Turkish principalities. Out of this chaos emerged Osman I, a tribal leader with a vision far greater than his peers. Osman saw opportunity in the weakness of Byzantium, seizing towns on the frontier and slowly forging a new identity for his people. His followers believed he had been chosen by destiny, a man whose dreams foretold a state that would eclipse all others. By the time Osman's successors took the stage, the Ottomans were no longer just raiders. They were builders, rulers, and visionaries with a clear sense of purpose. Their strength lay not only in their swords, but in their ability to govern, to bring order where once there had been only chaos. They drew in warriors, scholars, and peasants alike, promising stability and faith under the Sultan's banner. The name Ottoman itself came from Osman, but it was more than just a name. It became a symbol of resilience, ambition, and expansion. Step by step, the Ottomans expanded across northwestern Anatolia, capturing Byzantine towns and securing alliances. Little did Europe know that a storm was forming, one that would soon sweep across its borders. Conquest of Bursa and Adrianople in 1326, Osman's son, Orhan, captured Bursa, and with it came legitimacy. Bursa was more than a city, it was the first Ottoman capital, a seat of administration and culture. The Ottomans established mosques, markets, and schools, transforming the city into a thriving hub. For the first time, they had a permanent home, a symbol of permanence that marked them as more than raiders. From Bursa, Ottoman ambitions spread westward. In 1369, they seized Adrianople, modern Edirne, striking deep into Europe. Adrianople's location was vital. It lay on the road to the Balkans and served as a gateway to expansion. The Ottomans declared it their European capital, a bold proclamation that they had arrived in Europe not as visitors, but as rulers. The conquest of Adrianople marked a turning point. With this foothold, the Ottomans launched campaigns across the Balkans, subduing Bulgaria, Serbia, and Bosnia. Through a blend of diplomacy, marriage alliances, and military pressure, they brought vast regions under their control. The Balkan kingdoms, fractured and disunited, could not resist the advance. Europe began to realize the seriousness of the Ottoman threat. The fall of Constantinople. By the mid-15th century, one city still stood as the symbol of Christian endurance: Constantinople. For over 1,000 years, it had resisted sieges, its mighty walls defying empires. But in 1453, Sultan Mehmed II, known as Mehmed the Conqueror, set his sights on the ancient capital. His dream was not just to take a city, but to claim the heart of Rome's legacy and announce the Ottomans as heirs to empire. The siege was unlike any the world had ever seen. Mehmed employed massive cannons, including the legendary bombard, capable of shattering the Great Walls. His navy blockaded the city, while his Janissaries elite infantry pressed the attack. Day and night, Constantinople trembled under the thunder of Ottoman artillery. Inside the walls, defenders prayed desperately, knowing their stand was the last of Byzantium. On May 29, 1453, Constantinople fell. Mehmed rode into the city, claiming it for Islam, yet declaring it open to all faiths. Hagia Sophia, once the grandest church of Christendom, became a mosque. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became the beating heart of a new empire. For Europe, it was a catastrophe. The last remnant of Rome was gone. For the Ottomans, it was a triumph beyond measure. Expansion into the Balkans, with Constantinople secured, the Ottomans surged deeper into Europe. The Balkans became their primary frontier, and campaigns swept through Serbia, Bosnia, and beyond. Kingdoms that had once resisted crumbled, often weakened by internal strife and lack of unity. Where knights and nobles bickered, the disciplined armies of the Sultan prevailed. Hungary emerged as the next great obstacle. Rich in resources and strategically located, it became the next prize for the Ottomans. Through relentless raids, border skirmishes, and full-scale invasions, the empire wore down Hungarian defenses. Fortress by fortress, the Ottomans edged closer to Central Europe. For the people of the Balkans, Ottoman rule was both harsh and strangely stable. Christians paid taxes, but were allowed to keep their faith. Local leaders often found themselves cooperating with the empire, sometimes willingly, sometimes under pressure. The Ottomans blended governance with conquest, creating a system that absorbed rather than destroyed. The Siege of Vienna, 1529. By the reign of Suleiman the Magnificent, the Ottoman Empire had reached its golden age. Suleiman, a ruler of vision and ambition, commanded armies that stretched from the deserts of Arabia to the plains of Hungary. In 1529, he turned his gaze toward Vienna, the fortified capital of the Habsburgs. If Vienna fell, the gateway to Central Europe would be wide open, and the Ottomans could potentially march as far as Germany or Italy. The march to Vienna was immense. Suleiman led a force of nearly 100,000 soldiers, including Janissaries, cavalry, and artillery. As they advanced through Hungary, towns surrendered in fear or were crushed in defiance. The thunder of cannons and the sight of Ottoman banners struck terror in every village they passed. To Europe, this was not just an invasion, it was the specter of conquest, the looming possibility that Christendom itself could fall. Yet when the Ottomans reached Vienna, nature itself turned against them. Heavy rains and mud slowed their progress, supply lines stretched thin, and their cannons sank into the soggy ground. Vienna's defenders, though outnumbered, fought with desperate courage. After weeks of failed assaults, Suleiman realized the city would not fall. He ordered a retreat, leaving Europe shaken but relieved. The Siege of Vienna had shown that the Ottomans were mighty, but not unstoppable. The Mediterranean Wars, while armies clashed on land, the Mediterranean became the second great theater of conflict. The Ottomans built a vast navy that challenged Europe's greatest maritime powers, Spain, Venice, and the Knights of Malta. Control of the sea meant control of trade routes, islands, and ports, and both sides knew it was a battle for dominance as much as for survival. Ottoman admirals such as Barbarossa became legendary, striking fear across the coasts of Italy and Spain. Pirate raids, backed by the empire, devastated Christian shores, capturing ships and slaves. For decades, the Ottomans ruled the waves, their fleets sailing unchallenged through the eastern Mediterranean. To Europeans, the sea was no longer safe, and every sail on the horizon sparked dread. But in 1571, the tides shifted. At the Battle of Lepanto, a coalition of European states confronted the Ottoman fleet in one of history's largest naval engagements. The clash was brutal, and though the Ottomans were defeated, their power at sea endured. They rebuilt quickly, continuing to dominate maritime trade and islands like Cyprus. Lepanto was celebrated in Europe as a divine victory. Yet, it was not the end of Ottoman influence. It was a reminder that this empire could recover from even the harshest blows. The Battle of Arlu. Before Vienna, the Ottomans had already delivered one of Europe's most devastating defeats. At 1526, Suleiman's armies marched against the Kingdom of Hungary, a realm that stood between them and Central Europe. The Hungarian king, Louis II, rallied his forces, but the kingdom was divided and underprepared. The battle was swift and catastrophic. Within 2 hours, the Hungarian army collapsed under the relentless Ottoman assault. Cannons tore through their lines, Janissaries advanced with precision, and cavalry encircled the defenders. King Louis himself was killed, drowning in a river as he fled the battlefield. Hungary's defenses crumbled, and the kingdom was left leaderless. The victory had reshaped the map of Europe. Hungary was partitioned, with the Ottomans taking vast territories and the Habsburgs seizing the rest. For Suleiman, it was one of his greatest triumphs, securing the Danube frontier and placing the empire firmly at Europe's doorstep. For Europe was a nightmare proof that the Ottomans were an unstoppable force capable of crushing entire kingdoms in a single day. The rise of the Janissaries. At the core of Ottoman success stood the Janissaries. Unlike ordinary soldiers, they were forged from a unique system called the Devshirme. Christian boys from the Balkans were taken from their families, converted to Islam, and trained from childhood to serve the Sultan. To their parents, it was often a cruel fate, but to the empire, it produced the finest soldiers in the world. The Janissaries were disciplined, loyal, and innovative. While European knights clung to heavy armor and medieval tactics, the Janissaries embraced gunpowder weapons early. Their muskets and cannons shattered traditional armies, giving the Ottomans a modern edge. They fought not for wealth or personal glory, but for the Sultan himself, creating a corps that was feared wherever it marched. Beyond the battlefield, the Janissaries became a political force. They influenced the succession of sultans, staged revolts when displeased, and shaped the policies of the empire. For centuries, they were the sword and shield of Ottoman power. But in their later years, their corruption and resistance to reform would also become one of the empire's greatest weaknesses. Ottoman European diplomacy. For centuries, the Ottomans were seen as a sword raised against Europe, but they were also master diplomats. The Sultan's court in Istanbul became a place where European ambassadors came to negotiate, plead, or strike deals. The Ottomans knew when to fight and when to use politics, and this balance gave them an edge over their rivals. France, surprisingly, became one of their closest partners. In the 16th century, King Francis I allied with Suleiman against the Habsburgs, shocking Christendom. To the Pope and Catholic monarchs, it was unthinkably Christian king forming bonds with the Sultan. Yet politics often outweighed religion, and the Franco-Ottoman alliance endured for generations. Venice, too, walked a careful line. While often at war with the Ottomans over islands and trade, the Venetian merchants depended on access to Ottoman markets. Treaties were signed, broken, and renewed as both sides danced between cooperation and conflict. Through diplomacy, the Ottomans proved they were not outsiders. They were part of Europe's political system, feared, respected, and impossible to ignore. The Second Siege of Vienna 1683. A century and a half after Suleiman, the Ottomans returned to Vienna. In 1683, under Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa, an immense army marched once again to the Habsburg capital. The stakes were enormous. If Vienna fell, the Ottomans could dominate Central Europe for good. Their confidence was high and their numbers overwhelming. The siege dragged on through the summer. Ottoman cannons pounded the walls, sappers dug beneath the fortifications, and hunger gnawed at the city's defenders. Yet Vienna refused to yield. Messages for help spread across Europe, and slowly a coalition gathered to save the city. The fate of Europe seemed to hang in suspense. On September 12th, relief arrived. Polish King John III Sobieski led a combined force of Poles, Germans, and Austrians against the besieging army. In one of history's most dramatic moments, Sobieski's cavalry charge smashed the Ottoman lines, lifting the siege. For the Ottomans, it was a crushing defeat. For Europe, it was a turning point. The empire would never again push so far west. The Ottomans were conquerors, but they were also administrators of diverse faiths and cultures. Across their European domains, Orthodox Christians, Catholics, Jews, and Muslims lived side by side. While the empire demanded taxes and loyalty, it also allowed communities to govern themselves under the millet system, preserving traditions that might otherwise have been erased. This coexistence was not always peaceful, but it left deep marks on European identity. In Bosnia, Islam became rooted. In Greece, Orthodox Christianity endured under Ottoman oversight. In the Balkans, cultures blended in language, food, and architecture. Even resistance movements drew from both European and Ottoman traditions, shaping unique local identities. The Ottoman presence also left Europe with artistic and scientific exchanges. Coffee houses, Turkish baths, and architectural styles spread westward. European scholars studied Ottoman governance, while Ottoman artisans absorbed European designs. The clash between crescent and cross was real, but so was the exchange of ideas that helped define Europe's early modern age. Decline of Ottoman power. By the 17th century, the Ottoman machine began to slow. Victories were harder to achieve, and defeats became more common. Corruption spread through the Janissaries, who resisted reforms and grew more concerned with privileges than discipline. The once feared army turned into a political faction that often defied the Sultan's authority. Meanwhile, Europe surged ahead in science, trade, and technology. The Enlightenment brought innovation, while the Ottomans clung to old systems. Wars against Russia, Austria, and Persia stretched the empire thin, draining its treasury and weakening its borders. Provinces grew restless, and revolts broke out in distant lands. The defeat at Vienna marked more than a single loss. It symbolized the empire's gradual decline. No longer the unstoppable force that had taken Constantinople, the Ottomans now fought to defend what they had. Europe sensed the shift, and the once feared empire slowly became known as the sick man of Europe. As the Ottoman Empire weakened, European powers began to debate what would happen to its lands. This debate became known as the Eastern Question. Britain, France, Austria, and Russia each sought influence over Ottoman territory, seeing the empire's decline as both a threat and an opportunity. The Balkans became the center of unrest. Christian populations, inspired by nationalism, rebelled against Ottoman rule. Serbia, Greece, and Bulgaria each demanded independence, and European powers often intervened, sometimes to help rebels, sometimes to restrain them. The Ottoman state was forced into a defensive position, granting autonomy to regions it once controlled with an iron hand. For Europe, the empire's decline reshaped politics. The Crimean War of the 1850s showed that Britain and France would fight to keep Russia from consuming Ottoman lands. The Ottomans became a pawn in a greater game of European rivalry. Their sovereignty protected not by strength, but by the balance of power between their neighbors. The fall of the Ottoman Empire. The 19th century brought sweeping change. Nationalism, industrialization, and modern armies transformed Europe, but the Ottomans struggled to adapt. Reform movements, known as the Tanzimat, sought to modernize the military and government. Yet corruption and resistance slowed progress. Each decade, the empire lost more territory to rebellion or foreign intervention. By World War I, the Ottoman Empire was a shadow of its former self. Its Balkan territories were gone, its influence in Europe shattered. Yet the empire still commanded vital lands in the Middle East, and when it sided with Germany, it became embroiled in the most destructive conflict the world had ever seen. The end came quickly. Defeat in World War I led to Allied occupation of Istanbul and the carving up of Ottoman lands under European mandates. In 1922, the Sultanate was officially abolished, and the long history of the Ottoman Empire came to a close. From the heights of conquering Constantinople to its final collapse, the empire's European conquest had defined centuries of history. Legacy of the Ottomans in Europe. Though the Ottomans are gone, their presence in Europe remains visible. The skyline of Sarajevo still carries Ottoman mosques, bridges, and bazaars. In Greece and the Balkans, centuries of Ottoman rule shaped language, music, and cuisine. Even Europe's political map was shaped by the rise and fall of the empire. The Ottomans forced Europe to unify against an external foe, while also showing how diplomacy could bridge religious and cultural divides. The empire's policies of tolerance allowed diverse communities to survive intact, leaving a legacy of coexistence as well as conflict. Their failures, meanwhile, offered Europe lessons in modernization and reform. Today, the story of the Ottomans is remembered not only as a tale of conquest and decline, but as part of Europe's shared heritage. The empire's rise and fall was not an isolated chapter. It was woven into the very fabric of European history. From Vienna to Istanbul, the memory of Ottoman power still echoes through the continent, a legacy written in stone and memory. The story of the Ottoman conquest of Europe is one of ambition, triumph, and decline. It is the story of a people who crossed continents, reshaped kingdoms, and challenged empires. Yet, it is also the story of how power fades, and how even the greatest forces in history must one day yield. As we look back, we see more than battles and borders. We see cultural exchange, resilience, and the human desire for power and survival. The Ottomans may have fallen, but their influence endures, written into Europe's cities, traditions, and identities. And so, the tale of the Ottoman Empire reminds us of history's great truth. Empires rise and empires fall, but their legacies remain long after the final banners are lowered.